Life Miles is like the final boss battle of booking with points and miles because the deals are just insane. But the customer service and their IT is just so bad. Like I had a flight, it took me 7 months to get a refund.
Hey there, Points people! You just heard a clip from Freddy Lansky from Points Panda. Freddy has lived in over 5 countries and has traveled to nearly 100. He's been a digital nomad since 2010, and he is the owner of Points Panda. In this episode, expect to hear about updated strategies for flying to Latin America, since so many of the award charts and partners have shifted in the last year, tips for living digital nomad life, and how that landscape has changed in the last couple of years as well, and so much more. And if you are looking to maximize your points so you can travel like Freddy, you can request a free personalized tutorial video for your next points trip at geobreezetravel.com/request. We pick one free tutorial to prepare every week, which you'll find in the free GeoBreeze Travel newsletter. So make sure you open our newsletter every Monday to see if your request was the one that we picked and prepared. And now, on with the show! Hey, Freddy, welcome back to the GeoBreeze Travel Podcast.
Sure, thanks for having me back on.
So we've had you on here before, but for anybody who didn't hear your episode the first time, give us a quick intro. What got you into the world of points and miles, all that jazz.
Okay, going back from the very beginning, in 2011, I started a company called iChess with a business partner. We sold chess courses, and I was doing that for 8 years. We sold it to chess.com in 2019. But part of my job was flying out a lot to actually record the courses, even though they could technically do a lot of the stuff on their own. We just found that either flying them out or me flying out would make sure that they actually get the coursework done. So I was flying to Europe and Asia and Latin America a lot, especially from as our business grew from like 2015 to 2019 when we sold it. And I already had obviously like the Chase card, Amex card, and I was a typical like points amateur still using the portal. And then over time, I was discovering how to fly business class, and we didn't have like ChatGPT and all these points influencers and everything. I think the points guide, and there's a few blogs already talking about transferring to airlines and hotels and whatever to get better value from your points, but it wasn't as well known as it is today. And then I discovered that. And then not only was I flying business class nonstop for my business, but I just got really hooked on it as like a fun hobby as well. And then after I sold that business, I started Points Panda. It's a travel blog or points and miles blog. Hasn't been active about last like year and a half, and an award booking service as well. And now these days I work as a director of marketing for a few different businesses as a fractional CMO. And yeah, I've been based out of Mexico City, but sort of nomadic the last year.
Where have you been the last year?
So first I was in Asia for a little while, actually on the first Nomad cruise. So it's like a cruise ship for digital nomads. I got to speak about points and miles. And then I was in Asia at some other business conferences. And then this summer I was in Europe going to a couple different business conferences for entrepreneurs. I did another Nomad cruise. And then I spent about 2 months in a town called Bansko, Bulgaria, which is a hotspot for digital nomads, especially European digital nomads, because if you get residency there as a European, you pay way lower taxes than if you're like French or German person still living in France or Germany. So people just move there and work. And the rent is ridiculously cheap because it's a ski town. So in the summer, there's nobody really there. I think I was paying like $400 a month for a 1 bedroom apartment there, like a pretty nice one too, like modern furnishings and everything. So that was cool. And networking with other people just like you and me that have online businesses or work online freelance or a combination of both. And that's what I've been up to.
How does one fly in and out of that town in Bulgaria?
Yeah, it's a little bit of a pain in the butt to get there. So there's two airports, none of which are really close. One of them is Sofia, which is the capital of Bulgaria and the biggest city. And the other one is Thessaloniki, which I think is the second biggest city in Greece. Both are between 2 and 3 hours away, and both don't really have good, if any, real public transportation in the summertime. So what a lot of people do is they link up on WhatsApp and Telegram groups to book a private shuttle together. And yeah, it's a little bit of a long haul if you're like in the US or Asia.
For sure. And now you're back in Mexico, right?
Yeah, I'm back in Mexico City now.
Yeah. So, today we're going to talk about all of the different ways that somebody can go in and out of Latin America from the United States on points and miles. Because my favorite way, which was to book Latam using Alaska for like 45,000 points, I think my husband and I did that from Los Angeles down to Chile, got the complimentary stopover, then went to Buenos Aires. All of that was 45,000 points. It was great. That's gone now. So,
Yeah.
what's your
Well, it's not
favorite?
gone yet. It'd probably be gone by the time this podcast goes live. I think was it October 1st, October 31st. Yeah, it's been getting harder and harder to book LATAM through points transfers. I mean, the big drama started probably about like 3 or 4 years ago when Delta bought a big piece of LATAM and then LATAM left One World, but then LATAM still kept most of their former alliances except American Airlines, right? That was like the best way to book because they just had the best availability. So once that was gone, Alaska was still in play, and people were having a great time with Alaska Miles this last year because of the hack where you could transfer Amex points to Hawaiian Airlines, then move them over to Alaska from there. That's gone now since there's been the merger. And now Alaska Airlines and LATAM are ending their partnership, which is not that much of a surprise. A lot of people saw it coming. So there's still some good ways to book LATAM, but Alaska was just absurdly cheap. We're talking 45, 50,000 points for 9 to 10 hours in lay flat business class. So you can book on Virgin, and Virgin's been slowly putting LATAM space online. You used to have to call in. Now it's starting to show up more just directly on their interface. Aero Mexico as well. And actually, someone on the Seats.aero Discord turned me on to the fact that you can actually book LATAM through Finnair Avios. So for anyone who doesn't know, Finnair joined the Avios program along with British Airways, Qatar, Iberia, but you still have to call in, and the prices are not quite as good as Alaska, but they're still better than Virgin, right? The rule of thumb is more or less for every flight that Alaska had for LATAM, the Virgin is charging about double the miles, which if there's a 30-40% bonus transfer from Chase or Amex, it could be worth it. But usually it's like really quite expensive, right? What Alaska was charging 45,000 miles, Virgin would be charging about 100,000. And I wouldn't want to spend 100,000 miles on a 9 hour LATAM flight. I'd prefer to save that for like more interesting first class experience to like Europe or, the Middle East or Southeast Asia or something.
Absolutely. All right. So, given that is leaving with the Latam thing, that is a good note with Finnair. But since that's not too much of an option anymore, what are some other ways that people can book flights to and from South America from anywhere in the United States on points?
Yeah, so American Airlines, they still have some really good deals out of Miami and sometimes other cities as well. For those who don't know, a lot of times if you book directly from Miami to whatever the major city is in Latin America, let's say Sao Paulo, Santiago, Chile, or Buenos Aires, those are the three big airports, it'll be a lot cheaper on points, right? So that's where you want to look for the points deals. And what I love to do if I'm flying from the US, because when I'm flying to Asia or Europe, I have to have the lay flat because like there's such a big time change. It's almost certainly going to be overnight. But the difference in time zone between North and South America is usually not that drastic. It's anywhere between 2 and 4 hours from US or Canadian time zones, depending on where you're going. So I kind of feel like I'd rather just fly to Miami, stay in a like cheap Hyatt overnight. You can transfer Chase points to Hyatt and stay at like a Hyatt place or Hyatt house right by Miami or Fort Lauderdale Airport, and then catch the daytime flight the next day. But if you are going to do the overnight flights, usually Miami just has the best deal. So American Airlines still works. They transfer from City now. You can also still book Copa Airlines, which is not a very exotic airline. Their business class is quite basic, but what I really like about Copa Airlines, and I covered this on the last episode with you, Copa's really expanded their US footprint. So you can fly, say, leaving, I don't know, let's say Chicago, New York, Atlanta, Miami, Los Angeles at like 8 or 9 in the morning, transfer in Panama. And the way Panama does international connections is it's basically like a domestic layover in the US, right? You don't have to recheck your bags. Sometimes you have to do security again. Usually you don't. You just walk from your gate to gate. And then the Copa also flies to many second tier cities in South America. So you can go from your second tier city in North America, leave for the airport at 8 or 9 in the morning, transfer in Panama, and then land in the second tier city in Brazil or Argentina. Say you're going to Belo Horizonte or Cordoba instead of, I don't know, Rio de Janeiro, Buenos Aires, with just that one quick domestic layover. And the prices in business class are still pretty good. With Copa, you can find space for 40,000 points from North America to Southern South America. It's the same with the Avianca Life Miles too, even though there's not that much space. And then United has way more space with Copa, but it's 88,000 miles or 80,000 miles if you have like a United card or status, which sometimes can make sense. And I know we covered this on the last episode too, but we should also talk about cash prices, because for anyone listening to this who's used to flying to Europe or Asia, especially Southeast Asia, you're used to seeing like 5, 6, $7,000 round trip, sometimes even more in business class. So unless you're a multimillionaire, no one can really afford that. The pricing for round trip flights in business class from the US and Canada, or Mexico for that matter, to South America or Latin America, you can sometimes get round trip tickets for under $2,000, sometimes even under $1,500. If, say, you're going a little closer in, let's say Peru or Colombia instead of Brazil or Argentina, right? And Amex is getting rid of their 1.5 cent per point rebate, and then Chase's as well for the reserve card, I guess a little bit farther down the line, but still as of right now, you can get that. And then another way, actually circling back to LATAM, for those who don't know, Chase is redoing their entire portal system. It's basically a big devaluation with some small perks. And one of those perks is the point boost, where you get between 1.75 and 2 cents per point on hotels and premium economy and business class flights. The first thing we noticed, it's been reported on the Reddit and Discord boards, was LATAM premium economy was showing up at 1.75 cents per point. But now their business class flights are also showing up at 1.75 cents per point, right? So say there's a round trip flight from the US for, I don't know, let's just say $2,200 with LATAM, right? Might include your first leg on whatever they partner with to get you to Miami. And from there, at 1.7, I got to bust out my calculator, right? That'd be 125,000 points. Maybe you put a few $100 cash in a mix of points, right? And it's not too bad, right? You can still manage to get a decent deal out of the portal.
And that's round trip.
Yeah, round trip. Yeah.
That's a good point. If the cash prices aren't that egregious, it's when the portal can make a little bit more sense. If you have more talent for searching like for mistake fares on Google Flights or something, which I feel like there are a lot to Brazil and some of the other countries in South America because of currency translations and things like that. There's a lot of pretty cheap flights where, yeah, your cents per point, it's not going to be 6 or 7 cents per point, like sometimes what we get to the Middle East or Asia or Europe. But if you're optimizing for, I need to get to Latin America and I just need to save money on it, the portal can be a good place to look if you're flexible and can fly when the cash dates are cheaper.
Yeah, and there's a big caveat to that as of right now. So for those who had Amex Business Platinum or American Express Platinum cards, used to get a 35% rebate on any business class flight, which came out to 1.54 cents per point once you get the rebate. They're getting rid of that now, except for your selected airline. You can get that rebate, but only for one airline. And I don't know if you can even choose LATAM. And then for Chase Sapphire, with the Sapphire Preferred, you get 1.25 cents per point. And the Sapphire Reserve, you get 1.5 cents per point for any flight on the portal. But they're getting rid of that too. I think for existing card holders, it goes into effect sometime in early 2027. I got to look that up. And for new people signing up, they don't get that discount at all. So you're at the mercy of Chase's points boost, right? So for example, Copa has very good fares. I've used that 1.5 cents per point all the time when it made sense and I couldn't find award space. But it doesn't look like Chase is going to be partnering with Copa at this time. So you'd only get 1 cent per point, which is pretty weak sauce, right? But you could still book it in cash. You could still eat a piece of it off using Capital One purchase eraser with your venture points. Or if you really have like an excess of points, you could just still use it at 1 cent per point. But yeah, I guess it depends how hard you play the game and how many points you have. But yeah, I would look at cash fares as well, as they're usually quite affordable.
All right, so what are some of the other airlines that are good for these routes? We've talked about Copa, which is not lay flat seats most of the time, right?
Not most of the time, yeah.
We've talked about Latam, which looks like Finnair might be a good way to do that. Also, for anybody who's booking through Finnair, I have found there is more availability if you say you're in Finland and speak English versus based in the United States. So I was able to do that,
Uh,
booking a couple of seats back from Helsinki to the United States, but check that for additional availability as well. There's also American Airlines that we talked about, United Polaris. Delta, is that a good route? Is it going to be a gazillion points?
It's going to be a gazillion points, especially if you're flying out of one of their hubs. But sometimes there's decent deals on the premium economy seats, which are pretty similar to domestic first class in the US. But I kind of feel it defeats the purpose because since COVID, a lot of the daytime flights out of the second tier cities, like instead of Miami, let's say Atlanta, New York, have disappeared. So, like, I feel if you're trying to get some sleep overnight, a premium economy seat isn't that much better than an economy seat because you're still not really going to get a good night's rest. But I've seen some deals, especially with United. I forget what United calls their international premium economy, but I've seen some deals out of Houston before, some really good deals, like maybe 55,000 points. If you're flying business class with United, American, the only exception might be American, but like United or Delta out of their hubs to somewhere in Southern South America, Buenos Aires, Santiago, or Buenos Aires, it's probably going to be like a ton of points, like 120, 130, maybe even 200. And don't spend that. Like, there's got to be better ways to spend those points. The other airline we didn't talk about was Avianca, which is quite despised by, I think, most people in Latin America. They used to be a full service airline. Then they had like an identity crisis during COVID. If they're like essentially still charging like full service fares, but giving very similar to like Spirit Airline or Ryanair level service. And now they've recently started doing a business class on their narrow body jets that I'd say is pretty similar to premium economy with LATAM, or actually, it's very similar to Euro business class. So there's a middle seat blocked, but it's not quite like they put like a console on it and the seat like widens a little bit. So it's like almost a little bit of a better seat, but it's not quite a recliner seat. And the fares can be really, really cheap. I just did Mexico City to Manaus, and I have a Life Miles card with a company called Cardless. I don't know if you've probably heard of Cardless, right? Probably not the right card for most Americans, but if you fly a lot in Latin America, it has a $250 annual fee, but you get 6,000 Life Miles a year, and it does a 10% discount on Star Alliance flights with Life Miles. But the discounts for their own flight. So Life Miles is the points program for Avianca. So if you're flying Avianca Metal, sometimes it's as cheap as a 35% discount. So I think I pay like 32,000 points from Mexico City to Manaus via Bogota in business class. So you may want to be on the lookout for that there, especially if it's a daytime flight. You get a hot meal, you get the two bags, you get the priority check-in. but they don't have Wi-Fi and the seats are essentially premium economy. I would consider it the equivalent of a middle seat blocked. And the other thing about Bogota as well is unlike Panama or Lima, you can't do an international transfer without doing immigration and so on, just like you would in the US, which is a little bit of a pain in the butt. That's why I really, really love flying through Panama City. It's just the easiest way to transfer.
So, with the Avianca Life Miles, to kind of summarize all of that, you can get some pretty good discounts by booking on lifemiles.com if you want their business class product intra region, so within Latin America. Probably not a lay flat seat, just the one with the console in the middle, bigger, like maybe slight recline, but not a lot. Do you have that Life Miles $200 a year membership or something where they'll waive all of the change fees and everything? Did you do that?
Yeah, so the Life Miles card, so they did was actually quite deceptive because they were advertising the cardless card as you get no change fees, but actually that's not true because the credit card only comes with the lowest level of the Life Miles program, which gives you 500 miles a month for free, so 6,000 a year. But you actually have to upgrade to, I think, the $20 a month package, which gives you more miles, but it's not really that great a deal. Like, I think it comes out to like 1.8 cents per mile, whereas they oftentimes have sales where they're selling the miles at like zero point 0.2. So it's not a very good deal. And only then you get a refund on your miles. And so for anyone listening here, Life Miles is like the final boss battle of booking with points and miles because the deals are just insane, but the customer service and their IT is just so bad. Like I had a flight, it took me 7 months to get a refund. So they do with that credit card, you get a 20% discount on on the cancellation fees, usually $100. So they do it for 80, but then the miles never come back to your account and they have to send you some form. And apparently, like the form is never working. So then they tell you that they'll send you the form the next day and they never do. And then you got to have to keep calling. And I usually call in Spanish because I speak fluent Spanish and the wait time is usually much shorter. But one time I called the English hotline and I actually found someone to help me. And I hate having to do this with customer service, but I had to get a little angry and annoyed with them. Like, dude, it's been 6 months. Can you give me these like 20,000 miles back? Like, this isn't even worth my time of what I charge per hour as a marketer, the amount of time I spend. But what's really good about Life Miles is I'm sure most of your listeners now know about Roam and Seats.aero and all these other services. So that are basically aggregators of what you can get with points. Life Miles system is so bad that most of these aggregators can't find these deals. And so for that reason, a lot of these deals still like sometimes I get truly shocked of like how good of a deal it is. Like US to somewhere in Southeast Asia for like 70,000 points or something like that, where United would be charging like 200,000 points for that same flight. And I'm like, where did that pop up? Because I get all the aggregator tools and it's not there. So if you're patient, and then with the Life Miles card, you get an additional 10% discount, right? So if you're flying something like Lufthansa first class, where they charge 110,000 miles or something like that, maybe they raise it to 120. The credit card can almost pay itself off just with that one booking. They're giving you a 10% discount on that, right? And they do a 10% discount on Copa flights too. So I'm flying from Mexico City or Cancun to Southern South America. So Copa does have some lay flat seats, but they oftentimes change it out. So you can't depend on it at the last minute. But yeah, I guess I'm on a little bit of a tangent here with Life Miles. But yeah, I mean, Life Miles is great, not just for flights in Latin America. As a matter of fact, people don't even like Avianca pushes people to use Life Miles so much for Avianca flights, but nobody really wants to fly Avianca because their service just isn't that good. And having to lay over in Bogota is inconvenient. And their business class, even by Latin American standards, is kind of a joke. Even though it's improved, it can make sense. The real deals with Life Miles come from to flights to Europe and Southeast Asia or Northeast Asia for that matter. But you have to be really, really patient. And if something goes wrong, you have to be willing to call in multiple times. Oftentimes, I find a good deal with Life Miles, but I end up booking with Aeroplan anyways, which is the program for Air Canada. It's like I'm almost paying like an extra 10 or 15,000 miles just to know that if I can cancel, I can just click one button. And sure, technically they both have so with Air Canada's like 100 Canadian, which is like 80 USD. And then it's basically the same with life miles with my card, also 80 USD. But with Air Canada, I can do it in 1 second. I literally just press the button, I get with my miles back. Whereas life miles, if you need to cancel, like prepare to call and email, like you're in for a war. And oftentimes it may not even be worth it. Like if it's just 10 or 15,000 miles, you may as well cut your losses, because it's not going to be an easy process.
That is a really good point that just because something is the cheaper option does not necessarily mean you're optimizing by finding the cheaper option, which it feels like you are because you went through all this hard work. Like you mentioned, Life Miles is the final boss of testing your patience and meditation and yoga retreats and applying that into points and miles. And it feels like you're the champion because you went through all of this hard work and then you saved 15,000 points by booking it here instead. I do the same thing with clients. I just book it on Air Canada, and I'm like, "This is gonna be so much easier for everybody if we can all just agree that the extra 10,000 points is worth it to not have the headaches." Because one time, I was at a conference, and I was watching this panel of airline loyalty executives. They were talking about all of their different IT innovations, and I kid you not, the Avianca Life Miles lady who was, like I don't know her official title, we're just gonna say Chief Technology Officer. I've never seen somebody so overwhelmed where people would ask questions and she's just like, "Our backlog is nonsense and we can't get anything done." I'm like, "Why are you saying this on this panel on a stage in front of all of your industry peers and me?" But yeah, Life Miles, it's rough.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's not for the faint of heart. It depends on how much you're saving, right? If you're talking about a long distance flight from the US to Europe or the US to Asia, you could be talking like 50 to 100,000 point savings compared to what Air Canada or United is offering for the same flight. I have been seeing more deals recently with United from the US to Southeast Asia for 110,000 points or 100,000 points if you have one of the United cards or United status, which like 5 years ago wouldn't have been that great a deal. But these days, considering there's so little space to Southeast Asia from the US or Asia for that matter, it's actually a pretty good deal. I just booked for a friend. It was New York to Bangkok via Europe for 110,000 points. That was a pretty good deal. You may want to look there as well. It's not the best deal, but it's a decent deal if you're looking to do that there.
What are the actual lay flat seats that people can still book to Latin America? Because Latam was a good one. Emirates is a good one as well, where they have that fifth freedom just between Miami and Bogota.
Yeah, I haven't looked too much into that. They have another fifth freedom too from Rio to Buenos Aires. And I think the price went way up in points. So Emirates has been making their program more expensive. They lost a lot. I think you can't transfer with Chase anymore. And with Amex, you only get like 4,000 Emirates points for every 5,000 Amex points. And I think the other thing they did is now you can't book first class with points anymore unless you have status with Emirates. So I was lucky to experience the A380 first class before they came onto those restrictions. Yeah, you could fly from Miami to Bogota with Emirates first class. That's probably one of the cheaper ways to experience it on a shorter flight. Personally, I would rather spend more points and get the full experience. But yeah, I mean, you have Delta, American, United, right? They still all have their lay flat seats, Polaris and Delta One and so on, but they're really hard to book with points these days. And the price is very high in cash and very high in points. So there's a couple different options. Obviously, this is easy for me since I live in Mexico or I'm here a lot. The price to fly business class from lay flat for that matter from Mexico to pretty much anywhere in Latin America is literally a half to a third of the price that it is from Texas, even though Texas is only an hour away. It's like geographically almost the same thing, just because of the way that airlines calculate flying with points, even though most airlines got rid of. So now it's dynamic pricing, similar to the cash rate. So they just decide what they're going to charge. But there's still like vestiges of the old system where they choose how many miles it's going to cost based on the region, right? So they view Mexico as Latin America, and then Texas is part of the US, right? So you can do that, and that's a good way to do it, right? Maybe take a few days in Cancun, The other one is definitely look for the Latin American airlines, right? So LATAM flies business class and their lay flat business class is pretty good. I would say they're on par with the three US airlines, maybe even slightly better. And then Copa, it's you're either going to get a recliner seat or a lay flat seat for certain routes, but it's not always guaranteed. I got really screwed on that about 7 months ago. I was expecting a lay flat seat from Belo Horizonte, Brazil to Panama, which is a pretty long flight, it's like 6, 7 hours. And it was at like 1 in the morning leaving. And I was like, oh, I can't wait to get on my lay flat seat. The shock and horror on my face when I walked in, and it wasn't even the good recliner seat. So they switched it out for the, I keep saying 737 Max 9 to the 737 Max 8, which are like premium economy seats, like domestic first class. And that was pretty disappointing. So Copa does have some routes where they guarantee, quote unquote, that they will have the lay flat for the longer portion, which is usually Panama to either Santiago, Buenos Aires, or Rio, but it's not always guaranteed. Avianca still has some lay flat seats on their 787 Dreamliners, but those are mostly used for flights to Europe. I don't think they really use them very much in their intra-Latin American flights. I think from Bogota to Sao Paulo, they have, I have to look. But for Avianca, you can expect their kind of so-called domestic class, which is really Euro business or premium economy level service for at least some of the flights. Oh, and Aero Mexico. I totally forgot about Aero Mexico. Yeah, so Aero Mexico has great deals from Cancun and Mexico City. You can get a lay flat seat for 100,000 Aero Mexico points, but it transfers from Amex at 1.6 to 1. So that comes out to a very reasonable 62,500 points. So what you can do is fly to Mexico City or Cancun or Guadalajara.
Doesn't that go
Uh,
the other way, where if it transfers 1.6 to 1, you need more?
1 to 1.6. Yeah. And they had a promotion where they were doing a 20-30% bonus. And I don't recommend people to speculatively transfer, but I did because I knew I was going to use those points. And yeah, you can sometimes book LATAM with Aero Mexico points. Same with Delta, but the availability is so sparse. It's basically non-existent for business class. I've never seen a long distance business class saver seat on LATAM with Delta Sky Miles. Like never once in my life. Nobody has. Aero Mexico briefly had some like right after the pandemic, but I haven't seen very many since then. You can check to see if you could do like US to via, oh, that's another thing, the cash fares as well. So if you're willing to deal with the inconvenience of doing customs and immigration in Mexico City from the US, they don't operate like Panama or Lima. It's just like the US, you got to do immigration, grab your bags, recheck them. But there can sometimes be really good deals in business class too, under 2 grand. And it's not like Copa. If you're flying on the 787, the 787-9 has reverse herringbone seats. So it's like your own pod. And then the 787-8 has the more old school, like 2x2x2 seats. So the worst that could possibly happen is maybe they switch out the 9 for the 8, but you won't end up happening what happened to me, where you end up with a recliner seat. They had old planes that had those recliners. Sure.
How does that happen? Where if someone's like, I really, really want to make sure I don't end up on a plane switch, like I imagine you had researched the plane before it had lay flat and it was just a last minute plane swap. How does someone avoid that?
So this year, Copa started making some clarification. They're calling it Dreams. I don't know. That's what they're calling their lay flat seats. So it's guaranteed to have Dreams. Other times, it'll say the 737. It's so tricky. You really have to know where to look here because the 737 Max 9 is Copa's best seat, whereas the 737 Max 8 is Copa's worst seat, right? I think it's the exact same seat as American Airlines domestic first class, right? They're like these pretty hard seats, not a lot of recline. And then the 737-800, which is the older plane, are like those kind of puffier, big recliners that have the personal TV screens, the IFEs on them. A lot of times it's just bad luck. And that happened to me one time with Qatar, which is like a very reputable airline, right? Some of the best still happen, right? I went from super excited to try the Q suites when they came out, And then they switched me out for an older plane that was just a recliner, also in the middle of the night, also super disappointed, also didn't get any sleep. And
Wait,
like
this was all the way from where to Qatar?
it was one of the shorter flights, somewhere in Europe, maybe. I'm trying to think of where it was.
Okay,
Maybe
at least I was like, "They can't fly you in a recliner from the US."
now you're good. Like all their planes have Q suites now. Back then, it was kind of Russian roulette until maybe about a year and a half ago of whether you were going to get the Q suites or not. But yeah, I mean, sometimes there's last minute equipment swaps and there's not a whole lot you can do. So you go, you look, you see what the plane is, and then you hope if they do change the plane, you contact them beforehand to see if they'll change your date for free if you complain. Some airlines are more amenable to the other. Like when Copa switched out my plane and I was like threatening to file a complaint with the Mexican Consumer Agency, kind of similar to the US DOT, they just shrugged. They're like, all right, go ahead. Like, we don't have any right to do that. So there's not a lot you can do. But if you're flying long distance, business class, like from the US to Europe or Asia or vice versa. Maybe they end up switching it for a plane instead of like a reverse herringbone pod. You end up with the older one that are still lay flat, but you have a neighbor. It's pretty rare that you get such a bad end of the stick that it would go all the way from a lay flat seat to a recliner, but it does happen. And if it happens at the very last minute, there's not a lot you can do other than complain after, and maybe they'll send you some points. So I've noticed with like Delta United American, if you have some kind of bad service and you complain politely via email, just explaining, they'll send you 10, 20,000 points, maybe more depending on the situation. But the international airlines, like in Latin America, like if you're complaining to Copa or to Avianca, they're never going to give you anything. Like you just deal with, it's not even worth bothering really.
Cool. Yeah, if you can book the MAX 9, try that. If your plane gets swapped out, that sucks. All right, so that sums up that story. As we wrap up here, any other major tips for people who are looking to fly to and from South America, Latin America from the United States?
I guess a final one, most of the Latin American airlines, LATAM, Avianca, I think Azul participates in that as well. They didn't really talk much about Azul because it's almost impossible to book their lay flat seats with points. But they have this program called Plus Grade where you get to bid from economy to business class. And recently, rather than just bidding, they actually show you the price to guarantee the upgrade. So it's basically a one-click upgrade. And what you can do if you're tight on points, right? Or for those of us who don't have access to US cards, whatever, you can book your economy flight from, say, Miami to Sao Paulo, Buenos Aires, wait till they offer you the plus grade. And then it might be way cheaper than booking the flight just in business class itself. But obviously, you're rolling the dice, right? They may not offer you the plus grade, or the plus grade price may be really expensive, but I've seen it as cheap as like $300-400 to upgrade from economy to business class from Miami. So that's another tip as well.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much again, Freddie, for joining us on to the show again. I'm sure in a couple of years we'll have you back on because the airlines are constantly changing all of the different charts and the credit card offers and everything. So, always good to keep up to date with best ways to fly to different regions. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you so much.